Hello everyone, my name is Maud Texier and I'm the carbon-free energy lead for Google Data Centers. Welcome and thank you for being here. The title of today's discussion is Operating on 24/7 Carbon-Free Energy Everywhere by 2030, our most ambitious decade yet. It's a complex title because decarbonization is a complex issue. But make no mistake, this decade is Google's most ambitious. Because as Google CEO Sundar Pichai just announced, by 2030, Google is aiming to be the first company to operate carbon-free at all hours and in every location. Simply put, this means that we're sourcing clean energy for Google data centers directly from the regions in which they operate, not as an annual average across all times, but for every hour of operation. So we're pleased to collaborate with the Climate Group on today's discussion because they've been important partners to Google and to countless other companies in solving the challenges of achieving rapid grid decarbonization. So today, we'll first hear from Helen Clarkson, CEO of the Climate Group, then from Urs Olsley, Google's SVP for Technical Infrastructure, and finally, Michael Terrell, Google's Director of Operations, followed by Q&A, so you can submit questions to us directly on the event site. The next 10 years will truly be a decisive decade for Google, for climate change, and for our planet. So now, without further ado, I'm very glad to introduce the Climate Group CEO, Helen Clarkson.
Thank you, Maud, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm so pleased to welcome everyone to this roundtable held by the Climate Group and Google. As Maud was talking about, the 2020s are the climate decade. We need to halve emissions by 2030 to achieve a world of net zero emissions by 2050 with global greater prosperity for all. At the Climate Group, we drive climate action fast. We focus on systems with the highest emissions and where our networks have the greatest opportunity for change. Over 250 of the world's biggest and most influential companies, including Google, are now part of RE100, our world-leading renewables initiative for companies committed to 100% renewable power. Together, we are working to accelerate a global shift to clean energy, driving a cleaner, healthier future for everyone. As many of you know, last week was the first time that Climate Week NYC was held in the cloud. As we move towards increasingly virtual world, we need a clean internet. And that means data centers need to be running on clean energy around the clock. That's why Google's announcement is so significant. It's the next step in the clean energy transition and something that others can follow. It shows that strong corporate leadership can drive climate solutions, and it instills confidence in the immense economic opportunity. But making 24/7 clean power the norm will need collaboration. And I look forward to working with Google and other RE100 members to overcome the challenges together. I'm excited you're all here for today's conversation. And I'm very pleased to introduce you to the next speaker who's played an important role in Google's clean energy journey. To talk about Google's climate work and 24/7 announcement, I'll hand over to Urs Olsley, the Senior Vice President of Technical Infrastructure at Google.
Hi, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Urs Olsley, and for more than 20 years, I've led the development of Google's technical infrastructure across the world, including the data centers that power the applications that you've come to rely on every day. I joined Google in its earliest day because I saw something special. We've always viewed a challenge as an opportunity to go beyond the status quo. And sustainability is one area where we've long tried to go beyond the status quo. And the coming decade, in fact, will be Google's most ambitious decade yet. Our CEO, Sundar Pichai, has announced a series of commitments on climate change. And today, I want to talk about what we plan to do in the energy space to achieve 24/7 carbon-free energy at each of our data centers around the world by 2030. No one has ever attempted this before, and it will be a difficult challenge. But given the remarkable advances in the renewable energy industry, we believe it is possible. But first, a little bit of history. At Google, we've long been at the forefront of corporate sustainability. And in fact, in our very first decade as a company, we improved the energy efficiency of our servers and data centers such that they were twice as efficient as the industry average. And before that decade was over, we shared these techniques with the industry. And so today I'm proud to say that data centers everywhere, not just at Google, are much more efficient as a result of our work. But we also recognized early on that as a company, we must be carbon neutral. So 13 years ago, we became the first major company to be carbon neutral, offsetting all of the carbon we generated in all of our operations. As a result, since 2007, Google has had net zero carbon emissions. But then, for our second decade, we set a goal to become the first company of our size to match 100% of our annual energy consumption with renewable energy, creating an additional kilowatt hour of renewable energy for every kilowatt hour that we consume. When we set this goal back in 2012, we didn't know how we would get there, but we committed to it anyway. Along the way, we pioneered new ways to transact for renewable energy. We worked with policymakers to create clean energy access. And of course, we shared our practices with others. And in 2017, we reached our goal years ahead of schedule, becoming the world's largest corporate buyer of renewable energy in the process. So we've created gigawatts of additional wind and solar farms to reach 100% renewable energy. And even today, no other company of our size does the same, though several have announced that they plan to reach that goal by 2025 or 2030. In fact, if every company in the Fortune 500 matched their annual energy consumption with additional renewable energy the way we do, it would increase global renewable energy production by many hundreds of gigawatts. Our 100% renewable energy match was a major milestone, but we always thought of it as a step on the way to something even better. Annual matching is a big accomplishment, and as I mentioned, one that hasn't yet been achieved by other companies, but it does not mean that we're actually running on renewable energy 24/7, every hour of the year, in every location. No, it only means that we match our consumption on a global annualized basis. And so for our third decade of climate action, we want to go even further. And that's why we just announced the most ambitious corporate energy commitment ever established. By 2030, we want to achieve 24/7 carbon-free energy at all of our data centers worldwide, meaning around-the-clock clean energy, every hour of every day, everywhere. That's a significant challenge because wind and solar are such intermittent energy sources. But if we can solve that challenge for our very large data centers, then we will demonstrate that 100% carbon-free electrical grids are possible and commercially feasible. Our commitment to 24/7 carbon-free energy will require new technologies and new approaches, and we can't say that we know exactly how to accomplish it, but we do believe it's possible. And as we enter this decisive decade for climate change, the time for interim solutions has passed. The urgency of the climate crisis really demands much more from all of us. And the only way to meet the scale of this challenge is to increase the scale of our ambition. And that's why we have picked this goal. So to summarize, our work to address climate change has become an important part of our story. I'm proud of the role that we've played as a company, and I'm excited about the goal that we have set for a third decade to create 24/7 carbon-free electricity grids. To tell you more about our announcement and what it means, I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Michael Terrell. Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Urs, and thank you for your leadership. Also want to thank Helen Clarkson and the Climate Group. We greatly value the partnership we've had with you over the years with RE100 and other efforts. So my name is Michael Terrell. I lead Global Energy Market Strategy for Google. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the new 24/7 carbon-free energy target that we've set, what it means, and how we're going to get there. First off, I want to orient everyone to why we care so much about energy at Google. We're a very large energy consumer, and as you can see from the chart here, the demand for our services has grown over the years, and our energy demand has grown with it. In 2019, our total global electricity use was 12.2 terawatt hours. And that's about twice the amount of the city of San Francisco. We have several products that have over 1 billion users each, and we expect the interest in cloud computing to continue to grow and our electricity growth to grow along with it. So all of our services run on data centers. Our data centers are what our electricity consumers are within our fleet. And it's distributed all over the world, as you can see from this map. We have over 20 data center sites globally. Most of them are in operation, and some are still under construction. So historically, data centers have made up the largest share of our carbon footprint. And how have we addressed that over the years? We've done it by setting ambitious goals for ourselves and using the tools that were available to us at the time. So on the left there, you can see in 2007, we committed to be carbon neutral. And we've actually maintained that ever since. And at the time, it was really the best option for us in addressing the carbon footprint of our data center electricity consumption. We actually had a 1.6 megawatt solar installation on the rooftops of our headquarters in Mountain View, California. And at the time, that was actually the largest corporate solar installation in the world, which is pretty incredible when you think about it, because we've now signed deals for over 5,000 megawatts of PPAs. And that's that middle circle there. That really started in 2010, where we figured out a way to go directly to wind and solar developers and sign agreements to purchase the power from them. And we did that with our very first deal in 2010. In 2012, we actually set our goal to match 100% of our electricity consumption with renewable energy purchases. And we've now matched that goal for 3 years since 2017. And you can see in this slide here that we've now matched 100% of our electricity consumption with these direct purchases of renewable energy. So we're actually purchasing the energy itself and the credits that go with it. We've done that now for every year since 2017. What's been really exciting is just getting back to the progress that we've made over the years is that so many others have followed along with us and joined us in this effort to green our electricity supplies. So the chart on the left shows the overall volume of corporate renewable energy power purchase agreements. And you can see that it's really grown tremendously. In the last couple of years, we're on the order of 15 to 20 gigawatts, which is almost, utility scale or even country scale in its amount. And then on the right, you've seen that over 200 companies have now agreed to take on 100% renewable energy targets. But it's not totally completely addressing the issue of the carbon footprint of our operations. Because the way that we're doing that 100%, and Urs alluded to this a little bit, is that we are adding up all of the electricity we consume across our sites over the course of a year, and we've gone out and bought enough renewable energy to match that. But it doesn't mean that at every given site, at every given hour, we're carbon free. And this is a really interesting graph that we have. We call it our GRASS graph, which shows one of our data center sites, and it shows the renewable energy that we've procured over the course of a year matched up against the actual consumption of that site. And you can see that there's times where we're buying more wind power than we need, and then there's other times when the wind's not blowing as much, and we're having to draw whatever power is on the grid, and that's usually, in this case, very heavily weighted towards coal and natural gas. So we still have some things that we have to solve, and that really gets us to this notion of 24/7 carbon-free energy. And so just to recap what our CEO, Sundar Pichai, announced on September 14th, we are now setting a goal of achieving 24/7 carbon-free energy by 2030. We know that this is our biggest sustainability moonshot yet. It's incredibly difficult and it involves a lot of practical and technical complexity, but we really aim to accomplish this, and we think we've got a path for how we can do that. We want to be the first company that has achieved it, and we certainly, to our knowledge, are the first company that's set such an ambitious target. So why do we feel like now is the right time for setting such a goal? I actually get this question a lot. People are like, well, you're 100% renewable. Why are you doing this 24/7 thing? And again, this is about total decarbonization of our electricity footprint. That is what we're after. And there have been some really amazing developments in the markets over the past few years that have really helped to get us to the point where we are comfortable setting a hard target and being the first to set a hard target. The first is that we've just seen incredible cost declines in renewable energy technologies. So wind and solar have declined over 80% over the past few years. And that's really made these clean technologies cost competitive in a way that they never were before. And now we're seeing similar cost declines with energy storage. The other development that we're seeing are governments and utilities setting their own targets. They're a little not quite as ambitious. They're more on the order of 2040 or 2045 or 2050. But again, this whole notion of total decarbonization of electricity consumption is something that's actually being picked up by governments and utilities, because I think we all recognize that with these cost declines and the advancements in technology, we can get there. And then lastly, to that point about advancing technology, we're seeing really great progress from again, on the government side, and also companies and energy companies that are moving the needle on new kinds of carbon-free technologies for energy. So green hydrogen or carbon capture or advanced nuclear technologies like that. We feel like there's going to be a lot of progress over the next few years that's going to help us to meet this goal. So this is a global map. If you recall the data center map that I showed a few slides ago, this is where we stand currently from a 24/7 carbon-free energy perspective. So keep in mind, on an annual basis, we're matching 100% of our electricity consumption. But if you actually look at it on a site-by-site basis, it looks much different, and it's much more varied. We have some sites that have a really high penetration of renewable energy, like Oklahoma, and then we have other sites like Singapore, where it's much, much lower. And our job is to try to get all of these sites to 100% 24/7 all the time. So how are we going to do that? Again, Sundar really talked about how difficult this is, a goal this is, when he announced it on September 14th. Well, we've developed a three-pronged strategy for how we think we'll get there. And I'll talk a little bit about each and give some examples of how we're working through each. The first is we're really going to look at how we transact and contract for clean energy. Second, we're going to look at advancing technology and can we move the needle on technology. And then lastly, we're going to look at public policy and how can we be an advocate and advance public policy in a way that'll drive decarbonization of grids around the world. So the first area, transactions. What are we doing to transact for clean energy in a way that's going to help us meet carbon-free energy? Well, we have a lot of experience in transacting for clean energy through the 100% renewable energy work that we've done. And we've learned that we can actually layer some different approaches on top of that helps us to meet 24/7. And let me just give one example of how we're doing that. The image you see here is what we call a carbon heat map. It represents all of the hours of a year at our data center in Chile, outside of Santiago. And you can see that on the left side is January, on the right side is December, and then top to bottom are the hours of the day. And you can see that before we got started with doing anything in that market, 42% of the hours of the year were carbon-free. That's actually a pretty clean grid and much cleaner than most grids around the world. And they actually have a pretty good abundance of renewable resources like hydro on the grids in Chile. As part of our 100% renewable energy efforts, we did a very large solar PPA there in 2015, an 80 megawatt solar PPA. And you can see that it's very clear. The dark green band across the graph is the middle of the day when the sun is shining bright and we're getting all of that carbon-free power. And that took our annual carbon-free energy number to 63% of the hours of the year. So as part of our 24/7 efforts, we're like, well, how can we do better than that? How can we fill in those darker hours of the year when we're not sourcing carbon-free energy? And so what we did was we worked to source two different additional PPAs. We did another 35 megawatt solar PPA, and then we paired that up with a 90 megawatt wind PPA. And the wind in that region really blows sort of at the times when the sun is not shining its strongest. So actually in the middle of the night, in the early evening hours, in the early morning. And that really allowed us to green in a lot more of those hours at that data center site to where now it's projected to be 96% carbon-free energy. So again, that's just an example of how we can use transactions to try and fill in those hours. The second area I want to talk about is technology. We, obviously Google's a technology company, and we feel like there's a lot that we can do here to really hopefully move the needle, not only for us, but for everybody else. And there's really sort of three areas where we think we can work, as you can see listed here. How can we optimize existing technologies like wind and solar? How can we develop solutions for managing electricity demand better? And then how can we accelerate the commercialization of other next generation technologies? And let me give some examples of how we're doing that. So first, on optimizing existing technologies, we actually have quite a large wind and solar portfolio. We've actually signed PPAs for over 50 projects around the world. And we went to our machine learning gurus at Google, which are part of a group called DeepMind, and we asked them, can we use machine learning to help us to manage some of these resources that we have in our fleet? And by applying machine learning to about 700 megawatts of our wind, we've actually been able to forecast the production of that wind and then optimize how we bid it into the power markets. And by doing that, we've actually increased the value of that wind by 20% and also made it much more predictable for the grid operators to incorporate it into their mix every day. It's super exciting, and it's something that we're hoping can be scaled beyond the work we've been doing with our own portfolio. Second, we are looking at using technology to manage our own electricity demand, so the electricity that we're consuming in all of our data centers. And earlier this year, we made a project public that we're doing, which is to actually shift the compute jobs during the course of the day to optimize for the times when the electricity grid is the cleanest. So it turns out that there's a share of Google compute that doesn't have to be done right away. Adding new product features or doing backups and other things like that can be done anytime over the course of a 24-hour period. And we found that we can actually shift those compute jobs to the times of the day when the grids are the cleanest. And that can also is another way that we can help to fill in the carbon-free hours at a given site. And we actually think this is a really promising area that we want to explore further. We can actually look at potentially shifting loads from different data centers to each other. And also, this is something that hopefully can be scaled beyond Google. Lastly, this is an area we're actually looking at quite a bit these days, so expect to see more, is looking at beyond the contracts we have for wind and solar and storage and looking at other new technologies. I mentioned a few earlier. We think that there's a lot of opportunity here potentially. It's a little bit of a longer term bet, but we're expect to see more from us in that area soon. So the last area to talk about is advancing public policy. One thing we recognize is that we want to solve for Google, but we also want to solve for electricity grids around the world. We want to green electricity grids around the world, and we want to help lead the way to doing that. And one of the most important levers for as a lot of you know, is public policy. And this is certainly an area where we've engaged in the past. We've actually used public policy to help open up markets that were not available for companies to do direct renewable energy purchases. So we've done this in Taiwan, in Georgia, and North Carolina. But there's a lot more that we can do with policy, and we really intend to work with stakeholders and to play a big role here. So there's three areas in particular that we're going to focus on with our policy efforts. First is rapidly developing and deploying existing clean energy technologies. So that can be done through things like clean energy standards or other decarbonization efforts to give a direction to what technologies you want to help to decarbonize the grid with. The second one is really designing the energy markets to work better and to help facilitate more clean energy. So a good example here would be regionalization of grids, of the wholesale power markets. In the old days, the power markets used to be sort of utility by utility, and they would manage whatever was on their system within the boundaries of that system. We've learned that if you actually regionalize that across several US states, or you do cross-border trades in Europe, for example, you can actually help to incorporate more of the variability of wind and solar because you're managing over a larger area. And there's a lot of advantages to that, and we really want to see more of that and more of that evolution in the way we manage the power markets. And then lastly, we really want to work on public policies that empower energy consumers. We've learned that there are a lot of others like us who are really eager to decarbonize their electricity use now. They don't want to wait 10 or 20 years. And can we give companies and organizations more of a direct path for doing that? So that's another area where we're going to be working. How are we going to do that? We're going to work in partnership with other companies and NGOs and other organizations. And I've listed 3 here that we have been very much involved with. We are a founding member and chair of the board of the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance, which is focused primarily in the US, and its job is to break down barriers so companies and organizations can do more clean energy purchasing. There's a similar organization that's been set up in Europe called the Resource Platform. And then, of course, there's RE100, which is part of the climate group, which is working all over the world. And so we're really excited about working with these organizations and hoping to move the policy needle towards faster decarbonization of grids. The last point I want to make is that we're very cognizant of creating opportunity for everybody. And we think that moving to a clean energy economy can deliver huge benefits. And we've seen that with our own portfolio. We've seen that our own investments to date, our own renewable energy power purchase agreements have helped to generate 7,000 new jobs. And we think that by doing more and by moving to 24/7, based on what we're seeing and the information that we have, we think that can drive another 10,000 jobs by 2025. And then if you look at grids as a whole, we think that greening grids can also deliver jobs and opportunity and economic growth. So we're really excited about the future. And we think that this is an incredibly exciting time for clean energy. This is really the culmination of now over 2 decades of work by Google. And we're super excited about the future and looking forward to working with a lot of you all to help make that happen. So thank you very much, and happy to answer questions.
Great. Thank you, Helen, Urs, and Michael, for sharing your thoughts on 24/7 carbon-free energy. So for the next part of this session, we're going to move with some live questions from the audience, and I have Michael with me to answer those questions. So let's start with our very first question that came through the live audience. So Michael, first question for you. What are some of the biggest challenges that you expect to face to reach this goal?
Thanks, Maud. So I would say there are a lot of challenges. It's a very ambitious goal, but I would highlight 3 in particular. First, we want to make sure as we're marching towards this goal that we're keeping costs down and keeping them manageable and doing the work in a way that makes business sense. Why is that so important? Well, we want this to scale. We don't want Google to be the only one reaching 24/7. We want all companies and organizations to have a chance at reaching 24/7 carbon-free energy and all electricity grids around the world. And so making sure that we're doing deals and doing the work in a way that's scalable is really important. And we've actually seen that with 100% renewable energy commitments and all the corporate renewable energy PPAs that are out there. Those have been done in a way that many, many companies have been able to follow the lead of those who are pioneering that work. And we're hoping to do that with 24/7. A second challenge is regionally. The path to 24/7 carbon-free energy looks very different depending on which region you are in. And we feel like Asia in particular will be a challenging region because there are particular challenges associated with land availability or the existing resources for wind and solar that we'll need to tackle. So we have a lot of work cut out for us there, but we do think that there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of promise. And then lastly, we can't do this on our own. We need to see progress on electricity grids around the world in getting to carbon free. And that'll really give a big boost to the efforts that we do on top of that.
Great, thanks, Michael. Okay, so let's move to our next question now. So it seems like this effort is broader than just Google. Can you describe how you plan to work with others in the industry?
Yeah, that's a great question, and absolutely, we intend and want to work with others, and really are asking for help in helping to meet this goal. We want to work with other companies and organizations. The Climate Group, RE100, and the companies that are part of that effort have really been great partners so far in helping to break down barriers and share knowledge and information on how to tackle corporate energy portfolios. We want to work with electric utilities around the world to help source carbon-free energy on the grids where we operate and create more opportunities for utility customers to purchase clean energy and through their regular power contracts. And then we want to work with government and policymakers to advance public policy to help accelerate the transition to the clean energy economy.
Great. Okay, thanks. So let's move to our third question that we just received as well. So next question, how can we best incentivize other companies to follow your lead?
Yeah, that's another great question. And I think that, again, that's something that is very important to us. We really want to help lead the way for others to follow and to take these steps towards decarbonizing their electricity supplies. So there's a number of ways that you can help incentivize companies. One thing that we do is we try to be as transparent as possible and just sharing information and knowledge about how we're thinking through this with our own electricity system and our own procurement. So we publish white papers and blogs and charts and graphs and other information that really tries to explain how we're thinking through about these problems, how we're developing approaches for how we want to solve them, and how we're working for others. And those are available on the Google Sustainability website. We just did a new white paper that really talked about how we got to 24/7, how we got to the point where we felt like we could set a public target, and what we think the path forward is for us. And I encourage everybody to go and read that paper, and we'll have more to follow. I think the second thing we can do is work in partnership with others. I talked about in my presentation and just now in the Q&A, groups like RE100, the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance in the United States, and the Resource Platform in Europe. And those are great forums for sharing knowledge and information and best practices, and really, giving a path for companies and organizations that are really new to the space, that don't have energy teams like Google does, to really learn and to get tools and information and work with other companies to try and solve their own energy supply problems and challenges. And I think lastly, the one thing we can do to incentivize more folks to get into the game is just to recognize the role that companies can play in helping to drive progress on addressing climate change. I think this is something that's actually one of the most exciting things we've seen in the past, 5 or 10 years, is how many companies are really stepping up and recognizing that, hey, we have a role to play here, and we want to be part of the solution. And let's leverage the core capabilities we have as a company to try and solve that problem. And at Google, we're a large electricity consumer. We have expertise in data and compute, and we're trying to apply those as best we can to solve these problems. And I think just recognizing that every company has a unique set of attributes and abilities is something that can be incredibly powerful in helping to solve for climate change. And so really encouraging more companies and recognizing the role that they can play, I think, is a great way to bring others to the table.
Great, thanks, Michael. And yeah, talking about the voice of energy buyers, that brings us to our next topic on policies. And we have questions about policy more specifically. So what do you think are the main policy and regulatory barriers to overcome or change to achieve 24/7 carbon-free energy?
Yeah, another great question. And, I mentioned this in my presentation, but, policy plays a huge role here. The electricity sector is one that is highly regulated. And so public policy can really play a big role in setting the direction. In terms of barriers, I'll just call out three. There are many, but One, we need to have strong international frameworks, like the Paris Agreement, to really sort of align the global community on what it will take to address climate change and decarbonize the economy. Two, we have to look at carbon and internalizing the externalities associated with carbon emissions, and how do we address that, and what's the best way to do that. And obviously, we've had trouble on both of those first two things in terms of getting the entire global community on board with international frameworks and internalizing the externalities of carbon. But there's a whole slew of other policies that can be addressed to help drive the clean economy. And I mentioned, three areas in my presentation around, advancing carbon-free technologies and pushing policies that can do that, restructuring electricity markets to help regionalize electricity grids and facilitate more uptake of carbon-free energy. And then lastly, empowering energy consumers and giving, those energy consumers who want to be 24/7 carbon-free now, a direct path for how they can achieve that. So those are just a few of the policy barriers, but I do think public policy is a huge part of the solution and something that we should all be looking at.
Great. Thanks, Michael. So you just mentioned advancing new technologies for carbon-free energy. Question we have is, what type of new technologies specifically do you believe will be required for 24/7 carbon-free energy?
Yeah, another great question. First, let me just talk about existing technologies. I think one of the things that is so exciting, and one of the reasons that we felt like now was the time for us to actually set a 24/7 target for ourselves, is the incredible progress we've seen with solar, wind, and now battery storage. I mean, we've just seen historic cost declines, and in a lot of markets now, those technologies paired together actually can beat out in terms of price, what the existing resources are on the grid. So I think that's a really big development, and something that's really exciting and really going to help us get to 24/7. I think also we need to look at how do we actually optimize those technologies even better, and we've looked at, how do we use machine learning and other tools like that to really deal with the variability associated with some of those resources. So I think, more compute and optimization and machine learning and those kinds of capabilities is something that's going to be really important to reaching 24/7 carbon-free energy. And it both, applies to the generation side in managing the variability associated with certain kinds of generation, but also the demand side. And how do we manage demand better? And how do we optimize demand better? And how do we match, load with generation on a much greater basis than we're doing today? So I think those kinds of technologies are going to be really important. And then, of course, there are other power generation technologies, beyond wind and solar. And I think we're seeing a lot of really great progress on some of these technologies, whether they're advanced nuclear or green hydrogen or carbon capture. And if you look out over the next 10 years, I think there's a big role for some of those technologies to play in helping to green grids and helping companies like Google reach 24/7 carbon-free energy.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'll be moving to our next topic and question. So question we received is, how can we, all of us, get involved in achieving 24/7 carbon-free energy?
Yeah, well, everyone who's watching now, that's a good first step, which is, to educate and to get involved and to learn. There's so many resources now available, and so much great work happening on electricity and energy and research, and looking at what the path can be. And then I think looking at your own through your work or the way you live, and what are ways to help make changes there to help drive more progress on clean energy. And then also, again, working to advocate for changes and improvements in policies to help drive this transformation. But this is a problem that is global in scope, and we all need to be part of the solution. And I think one of the things that really excites us is that so many of the solutions are really deliver all of these other benefits. Whether it's smart thermostats that optimize your home, or electric vehicles that perform even better than what they're replacing, or other kinds of tools and technologies. And so, I really think that I encourage everyone to explore options, to learn, to get involved in work and at home. And I think if we all do that, we can really accelerate this transition.
Yeah, thanks. And so talking about actions and options, our next question is about Google's actions specifically. So can you share details about what is the roadmap that you will follow to achieve the 2030 objective? And for example, will you set intermediary targets?
Yeah, that's a great question. And once again, I'll steer everybody to our white paper, which is on Google's sustainability website. You can just Google sustainability. And it really lays out what we think our path is to 24/7. And this is something that we've actually been thinking about quite a bit. We first surfaced the idea of this aspiration a couple of years ago, and we've really spent the last couple of years looking at our own portfolio and how we think we can get there. And it really breaks out into sort of 3 areas that are part of this roadmap. So the first is, like I talked about, how we transact for energy. And so I expect to see more blended transactions with wind and solar and storage. And this is a really exciting development in the corporate procurement space, in that you can do these transactions in a way that make business sense and also give you a lot of carbon-free hours over a 24-hour period and over 365 days of the year. So expect to see more of these transactions as we're looking at how we supply energy for our data centers around the world. The second area, again, is technology. I talked about that. A lot of opportunity and promise in technology, particularly in taking, IT technologies that are really core to companies like Google and then applying them into the energy space. And again, this is another area that we're looking at quite a bit. How do we actually, do that and do that in a way that helps us to reach 24/7? And then also looking at other energy technologies like I talked about. And then lastly, policy. I think we'll do a lot more work on policy. We really want to look at every electricity grid where we're operating, and what's the path to carbon free for that entire grid, and how do we work with others to help realize that, and realize it in a way that benefits all consumers and doesn't leave anyone behind. And then in terms of intermediate targets, stay tuned for that. I think we're going to have a lot of exciting things coming down the pike. I think we're looking also at individual sites and how do we take individual sites to high penetrations of carbon-free energy. And so there's a lot more to come. It will certainly not be where we disappear and we'll pop our heads back up in 2030 and say we've gotten there. We're going to include everybody in this journey. And we're also going to be transparent about where our failures. And I think that's actually something that's really important to recognize here, is that, it's not going to be a sort of gold-plated path to success along the way. Like, this is a really hard challenge that we're tackling and taking on. And, not everything we try is going to want to work. And of course, the old saying goes, fail early and fail often. So we expect to be as transparent as we can about our roadmap and our path and the steps we're taking along the way to reach 24/7. But, it's an incredibly exciting time. This is really, like we've said, the last step in the journey towards, complete decarbonization of our electricity supply. And we're really excited to sort of drive this forward.
Great, thank you. So next question will already be our final question. So for this last question, you talked a little bit about the roadmap, but can you give us a little bit more insight on what are your specific next steps for this program?
Yeah, I talked a little bit about that. I think, I would say to everyone, stay tuned and pay close attention. We do have some things we're working on now that we're expecting to make public here in the near future. And in all 3 of these areas, whether it's the way we transact for energy or the way that we want to apply technology to solve these problems, or the way that we want to engage in the policy space with other stakeholders and other groups to do that. So, like I said, we're super excited about the future, and stay tuned, and we will have more to come. And I encourage everybody to read our paper in the meantime.
Great. Thanks, Michael. So that was our last question for today. Thank you for being with us, Michael, answering all those questions. I would like to thank you, Helen, and the Climate Group as well for being with us today, as well as Urs for being our sponsor. And thank you all for being with us, for attending, for asking questions. And I hope these answers can help you. And we are very much looking forward to working with you on achieving 24/7 carbon-free energy. Thank you and have a good day.